Welcome to part 3 of our Deuteronomy series. We have started about 2 weekends ago. This is Anxious About the Future, Look to the Past. And this says part 3, but it's actually part 2 of our series about the past and about being anxious about the past. Part 3 in the series at all. So this morning, I want to start this way. Let's review with what we talked about last week. We talked about what does it mean to be institutionalized. And we gave some examples last week of people that have been in prison for a long time. We gave examples of people that maybe are more used to being in bondage than not being in bondage. And we talked about Shawshank Redemption, some things like that. Just by way of review, I'm going to go through a few things with you. We talked about after 400 years of slavery, that old generation was totally institutionalized. They could not do anything on their own without being extremely fearful. And it cost that generation their livelihood, really. And God saw it as a slight against him, as an insult against him when they behaved in the way that they did, that old generation. We talked about that last week. When you have fear and anxiety, you're basically communicating to God that he can't be trusted, that his sustenance isn't good enough for you. And we don't want to communicate that to God by any stretch. So fear today still institutionalizes people, leaving them without the rich experience and appreciation they could otherwise have. I'll tell you, as a counselor, as someone who's spent a lot of time sitting with people and talking through people's fears, there's a lot of people out there that are scared, and sometimes they're scared of, I'll say, legitimate things, but for the most part, they're illegitimate things that they could give to God, that they could get God on their side with, and yet they choose to stay in bondage through fear. And fear, as we talked about last week, is normal. It is from God. It's a survival instinct. It's a healthy emotion. When you're threatened by something, fear is something that God gave you so that you could get out of there if you need to, right? You've heard about fight or flight, right? Well, fight means that you're angry, and God gave you that too. When you need to be angry, you can stay and you can fight. But when you need to get out of there, he gave you fear so that you can flight. And there's such a thing, though, as unhealthy fear. When we have a disproportionate response to a threat, or we have some sort of overestimation of the danger and an underestimation of our ability to cope with it, that's an unhealthy fear. And I put a picture here, same picture I had last week, of a woman standing on a chair because of a mouse. And the idea is that she is overestimating the danger from that mouse and underestimating her ability to get over it. If she was just on the ground, she would be just fine. She would have all of her faculties. She could do it, but she underestimates her ability to cope with it. And we talked last week about that old generation, about what they were scared of. And the wilderness was the first one. They were scared that God would not provide for them the sustenance, the food, the clothing that they needed in the wilderness. This week, we're going to start to talk about other things. I have here intelligence from spies, and you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. The cities are fortified. They were scared of that. How are we going to take this land when all these cities are fortified? Up to the heavens, they said. There's giants in the land, right? Watch out for the giants. This land of Canaan devours people. And finally, our wives will fall by the sword. All of these things the old generation was scared of. And what you're going to see today is that God is going to go one by one, and he's going to show the new generation how they need not worry about that because he took care of it all. This new generation has a decision to make. They have a choice. Are they going to be fearful like their old parents? Or are they going to trust God and do it God's way? And it very much is an open question when Moses is speaking to them in Deuteronomy. Now we're on the other side of history now, and we know that they did it, right? They went into the land. They were able to capture the cities. They were able to defeat the giants. We know that they did it. But they still had to make the choice if they were going to follow God or not. And it was an open question when Moses gave this sermon. But you know, here's what he essentially does, and here's what I want you to remember today. God provides a solution for fear. And the solution is he wants you to remember the past. That probably is the most common command that you see in the Bible. If I think about all the commands that God gives, I think remember, right? Remember must be the most common one. Remember what the Lord your God did. Remember how he brought you out of Egypt. Remember how he kept you by his side, how you never lacked. Remember, remember, remember. That's how you get over fear. As you stop and you think about God's goodness, and I'm going to show you today all of these things they feared. One by one, he takes them out of the way. Now, the first one we covered last week, and that's the wilderness, right? The wilderness was the idea is that they didn't have enough sustenance, that they wouldn't have enough food and clothing and shelter. And we already saw God took care of that for them. We saw that his shoes, or their shoes, never wore out. We saw that the whole time they were in the desert, they were kept for and cared for, no problems whatsoever, right? Well, here's the second fear, and I'm going to call this the fear of the unknown. They did not know what to expect 100% when they went into the land of Canaan, and they sent spies for that reason. Now, you're going to see that God is the one who had the idea to send the spies. Let's look at the verse here. Here's what God actually said. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." Okay, sounds fair enough. God says, hey, there's a land, go spy it out, send 12 people. Now, why do you think God sent them to spy out the land? God already knew he was going to give them the land. God had already told them, I'm going to go before you and I'm going to take care of this for you. So he sent them to spy it out, in my opinion. Now, the Bible doesn't say this, but he sent them to spy it out so that they could see the goodness that they were about to have, so that they could say, hey, I know what's there now, and I'm willing to go and trust God for it. That's why I think God sent them to the land. But that purpose was totally lost on them. Let me show you what actually happened. So God just says, go look at the land. Go take a look, right? Go spy it out. Moses said to do this. Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up this way into the south and go up into the mountains and see what the land is like. And look at this, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. See, Moses sent them with some directions that they needed to bring back some intelligence. They needed to know a little bit better about what they were getting into. They needed to know more about the people, and are their cities strong, or are they just, tents, or rich or poor? And, Moses is a much better man than I am, but I wonder if he didn't drop the ball on this one a little bit. I wonder if he didn't maybe accidentally put some fear into them, rather than encourage them to look at the land and its goodness and that their God is going to give it to them. He mostly maybe got them overthinking a little bit. He continues, and every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up, and of the cities into which we shall come. And Moses said, the plan pleased me well. So I took 12 of your men, one man in each tribe. I think they overthought this. I think God intended for them to look at that land and then to trust him. And instead, they looked at that land and they started thinking about all the problems. They started thinking about all the challenges they would have to overcome. And the fear got the better of them. No more were they thinking about their God taking care of them. No more were they confident in him. They were overthinking. Now, friend listening today, you are an overthinker probably. I am too. It's natural for us to do it sometimes. I shouldn't say it's natural. It's something that we often do. But you know what it is? What we call overthinking is really just fear. Really just fear. Nothing more, nothing less. Here's some modern examples. WhatsApp messages. I was talking to a young person recently, and they were telling me that when you send a message to somebody and that person looks at it but doesn't respond right away, this young person was telling me, well, that communicates a message to me. That makes me think that, they don't like me, or they can't be bothered with me, or the speed with which they get back to you has something to do with what they think of you. And this young person had all kinds of, little rules that had gone on in their head about WhatsApp messages. And here this whole time, I thought when somebody didn't WhatsApp me right back, it might be because they're busy. But no, it's not it. They're not busy. They're just, making you wait because you're not so important and things like that. I think that's overthinking, right? And we do that a lot with other things, not just WhatsApp messages. Here's another example: social interactions. You go to a party and you hang out with some friends and you say something, and later on you're sitting in bed and you think, I wonder if I shouldn't have said that. There was a look on his face, or maybe there wasn't a look on his face, or there was no reaction and when I said that, and I wonder if I said something wrong, or I don't know, why did he do that? Why did she do that? Why did he say that? He walked off right after that. We overthink all the time in social interactions. And you know what? It's just fear. It's just us overreacting to some circumstance. How about evangelism? All right, I live in a country where a lot of people are off limits for evangelism. And that has made me and others like me a little gun shy sometimes with certain groups of people and evangelism. But we're commanded to share the gospel with people. Even with people that are, quote unquote, allowed to hear the gospel here. Sometimes we'll say, well, maybe I don't know them enough, or maybe they don't respect me, or maybe I need to get to know them, or maybe I need to wait for a sign from God. And we just overthink it until we don't do it. And evangelism is something that you're just supposed to do. You're supposed to be intentional about it. You're supposed to be reaching out with the gospel of grace and telling people how they can spend eternity with God, that they can be in his holy presence forever, just by trusting in the gospel that Jesus Christ died for their sins. Don't overthink it. Just do it, right? I like this cartoon. So this says time cost. So here's somebody thinking about strategy A and strategy B, and which one is the better strategy for this person. And then there's another bar for analyzing whether strategy A or strategy B is more efficient. So the idea here is that this guy is spending so much time inefficiently just by wondering whether strategy A or B is the right one to do. And that's why he's so inefficient. Kind of silly, but I bet you've done that before. I know I have too. Well, maybe Moses should have just taken the land because God said to take it. Maybe he shouldn't have given all of these directions about, military strategy and wondering. Maybe he should have just trusted God. Maybe the way he gave the directions inadvertently caused these guys to fear. And we know what happened, that they wouldn't actually go in and take the land. He didn't really need any extra intelligence. He had God's word that God would take care of it. Folks, let's not overthink things. And let's just not. I have a policy that I go by where I take people at their word until they give me a reason not to. If you tell me something, I take you at your word until I catch you in some sort of lie, or I have a good reason to believe that I can't take you at your word. And we can take God at his word. That's what faith is. God said, I'm going to give you the land, period. I'm going to give it to you. And if you believe God, then you'll go get the land that he has prepared for you, that he's gone before you to take. So it's just a matter of believing God. Okay, next one, number 3. The land will devour us. So the spies, they came back, and it says they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, right? And I put a picture here of like the Badlands that you see in North Dakota and places like that, just bad land that's going to devour people. Well, and everybody got scared, right? They believed the spies. Now, this was just a lie. This was not even the truth. It was just a total lie. And you know what? They had plenty of evidence that this is not a bad land that devours people. They brought back the fruit from the land. And look what the Bible says. It says, and they departed and went up into the mountains and came to the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. They also took some of the fruit of the land in their hands and brought it down to us. And they brought back word to us saying, it's a good land which the Lord our God is giving us, right? It's a good land. It's not a land that's going to devour us. Now, some people were saying, no, this is a bad land. But, the good guys were saying it's a good land, and they had the fruit to prove it. They had a lot of fruit to prove it. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and the figs. Right? Can you imagine bringing back so much fruit that you have to carry it on a pole between two people? This is not a land of a little bit. This is a land of a lot. This was not a land that was going to devour people. This is a land that was going to feed people, sustain families for generations. The wine presses, the vineyards, they were already built, and God was just going to give it to them. But a few liars came along and put fear into the people. Just fear. This is an example of what I call irrational fear. You have all the evidence you need to make a good, rational decision, and you still choose the irrational choice. You've got all the fruit sitting in front of you. You have every reason to believe that the land is going to be a good land for you, and you still let other things, other fears, just dominate you so that you don't do it. Irrational fears are something I've sat through a lot of listening to a lot of those in my life as a counselor, a whole lot of them. And for some reason, you can't just explain to the irrational person that their fear is irrational. I don't know why it doesn't work, but for most people, it doesn't work. You can talk them through it, and you can say, you see how that wasn't really a rational thing to think, and it just goes right over their head. But what you can do is you can point to God's past goodness, right? You can point to what he's done for them. Start to appeal to them, not on the rational level with whatever thing they're scared of, but on the level that God is always taking care of you. It's always been the case that he takes care of you. So don't be an irrational fearist like these people were, these Israelites were. How about number 4? There's giants in the land. Got a picture of a big giant here. Nevertheless, Moses said, you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God, and you complained in your tents and said, our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we've seen the sons of the Anakim there. The Anakim were the race of just giants. That's what that means. But here's what Moses said. Then I said to you, do not be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, he will fight for you, according to all that he did for you in Egypt before your eyes and in the wilderness, where you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his son, and all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet for all that you did not believe the Lord your God. This is a legitimate fear, right? If I saw a giant, I would be legitimately scared. I myself am a tall, ugly man. I'm 6'6", and I'm not the best looking guy that there's ever been. And oftentimes little kids will see me and they'll sort of hide behind their parents' legs and things like that. So I understand that. I don't get upset about it. If I saw a giant, I'd be scared too, right? But the fact is that they didn't believe that God would take care of those giants. They just didn't believe it. The same God that brought them out of Egypt, that fed them, that led them by fire and a cloud, that spoke to them out of the mountain, that same God told them, I'm going to take care of these giants. Don't worry about it. And they wouldn't believe it. Now, look at this. God had done this already for other people who were not his chosen people. You know that his chosen people is Israel, right? The family of Abraham, the line goes through Israel, through Jacob, those people. But you know what? He had done this for some others of Abraham's family, not just the children of Israel, who's his chosen people. He had done it for some others. He had done it for Ammon. Look at this. I'm going to read this to you. And when you come near the people of Ammon, do not harass them, Moses said, or meddle with them. For I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession. This is God speaking, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot as a possession. Well, who's Lot? Well, that was Abraham's nephew. And now these people have that land, and God is saying, don't touch that land. The Ammonites have it. I gave it to the Ammonites. That's their land. You don't touch it. Now, that's not God's people, right? Israel is God's people. But look what it says. That was also regarded as a land of giants. Giants formerly dwelt there. But the Ammonites called them Zamzummim, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them before them, and they dispossessed them and dwelt in their place. Now look at this. Just as he had done for the descendants of Esau, another one of Abraham's children, right? Esau was the brother of Jacob. And the promise does not go through Esau, but he's still kind of somebody God cares about. And God had given him this land of Seir. And it says, when he had destroyed the Horites before him, they dispossessed them. The Horites were giants, by the way. They dispossessed them and dwelt in their place even to this day. Here's my point. God had done this. He'd already taken care of giants for people that weren't even his people. Do you think that they should have known that he would take care of the giants when it's his people? I think they should have known. They knew that God had taken care of the Ammonites and the Edomites. That's Esau's people. And yet, they didn't do it anyway. How about fear number 5? They have fortified cities. Our brethren, that's the spies, have discouraged our hearts, saying the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we see the sons of the Anakim there. They're still talking about the giants. It's the same verse, right? Look at this. Fortified up to heaven. Now, that's what you call an exaggerated fear, right? Those walls weren't up to heaven. They were probably something like 30 feet tall, right? It's when you look at some fear and you make it out to be a much bigger deal than it really is. That's exaggerated fear. And you do that too. I do it too sometimes. We'll look at something and we'll say, oh, like a mouse on the floor or a roach or something, and we'll just go crazy about, oh, this is such a terrible thing. And we exaggerate the threat that it really is. Well, that's what Israel was doing. God had said, I'll take care of these walls. I'll knock them down. And they were saying, no, they're built up to the heavens. They exaggerated. When I was a kid, there was a very unfortunate young man named Ryan White. And he had gotten the HIV virus through a blood transfusion. And he ended up getting sick with AIDS. This is back when AIDS was just getting started. This is the early 1980s, maybe, I'm going to guess 84, something like that. And now, these days, AIDS is sort of taken care of, that you can't cure it, but you can keep the virus level in someone's blood so low that they basically live as if they don't have the virus. But Ryan White, in those days, they didn't have those medicines, and this poor fella had gotten a transfusion, and he had the AIDS virus. He had HIV. And I remember the news stories about how parents of the children in Ryan's school, Ryan's classmates' parents, would just take him out of school. And I remember seeing this one mom being interviewed, and she said, I don't know if this little boy sits on a toilet and my boy sits on the toilet, my boy, I think he might get AIDS, right? He might get HIV. And all of these parents were just whipped into a frenzy over this little boy and over this AIDS epidemic, exaggerated fears, right? They had nothing to worry about from Ryan White. Unless Ryan White cut himself and somehow his blood mingled with their blood, there would be zero danger for them whatsoever. And people were losing their minds. Here in Malaysia, we see a lot of exaggerated fear these days. We see people losing their minds when there's one case in Penang, right? They all of a sudden think that it's the worst thing in the world and they keep everybody home, and they overreact to the real danger of this virus, and they underestimate their ability to cope with it. We've got to just not exaggerate fears. That's not from God when you're exaggerating a fear. That's from you. That's from the devil. That's from the devil convincing you that you're not good enough and that God isn't good enough to sustain you. Well, here's what happened to those walls. And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og and Bashan, all these cities were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many rural towns, and we utterly destroyed them. Bang, right? That's just it. God took care of it, and he's telling the new generation, hey, you know what? He's going to take care of you too. When you go into the land of Canaan, there's going to be high walls, and guess what? God's going to take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. He said he would, and he's going to do it. Don't be exaggerated in your fear. Later on, he says, from Aurora, which is on the bank of the river Arnon, and from the city that is in the ravine, as far as Gilead, there was not one city too strong for us. The Lord our God delivered all to us. One more fear that God took away. Right? One more excuse that he took from them so that he could trust them. And he's doing that to you today too, friend. He wants you to remember the time that he bailed you out of something, the time that you were in problems and he helped you, when you were having rough times and he was there for you. There's no reason to be scared. He wants you to remember. Here's the last one. Our wives and children will die. They're so scared of that. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? That's what they said to God, to Moses. But here's what God did. Moreover, Moses reminds them, your little ones and your children, who you say will be victims, who today have no knowledge of good and evil, they shall go in there. To them I will give it, and they're going to possess it. In other words, these wives and children, these little ones especially that you thought were going to die in the wilderness, they're the ones that are going to go in the land. And they did. They went in the land. They just did. And this is what I call worst case scenario fear. Right? You look at your family and you think, what's the worst case scenario? Well, they're all going to die. That's the worst case scenario. I don't care who you are. If you're thinking about your family this morning and you're thinking about your family life and what could happen to your family, that's the worst case scenario. Everyone's going to die. Well, our mind oftentimes jumps to the worst thing. Here's an example. I have a blemish on my face. I hope it's not cancer. Do you know somebody who's ever said something like that? It could be a zit, or it could be just a little rash, or maybe a little birthmark. But no, your mind goes straight to the cancer, right? The boss called me into his office without telling me why. I just know he's going to fire me. Right? Your mind goes to the worst thing. I can't find my computer. Someone stole it. Guess who did that one? That was me. And I give some people a hard time in my family about that kind of thing, and then I did it too, right? Nobody stole my computer. I'm just a dummy, and I left it somewhere where I shouldn't have left it. Here's the idea. Don't let your mind go to the worst case. The worst case almost never happens. And you know what? When the worst case does happen, God gives you the ability, gives you the grace to get through it every single time. No matter what your worst case scenario is, God will be right there with you. And in 10 years from that, you'd be able to look back and say, hey, that was the worst time of my life. But you know what? I remember how God helped me. I remember how he brought me out of it. I remember. One by one, God took away the excuses of this generation. And the way he did it, he said, just remember what I did for you, right? How about this? And then I said to you, do not be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, he will fight for you. And then look at this, according to all he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Remember, right? Don't forget. And in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you, as a man carries his son, and all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet for all that you did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you to search out a place for you, to pitch your tents, to show you the way you should go, in the fire by night and in cloud by day. Remember all that. Your parents didn't. You need to remember God's goodness for you. Later on in Deuteronomy, talking about Joshua, it says, and I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to those 2 kings. So will the Lord do to all the kingdoms through which you pass. You must not fear them, for the Lord your God himself fights for you. You know, if you're Joshua, I think that must have comforted him quite a lot. Joshua many times has to be told, be strong and of good courage. And we know he was not a weakling. He was one of the spies that went in and, said, we can take this land. He was a brave man. And then when he was 80 years old, they went in and he did take the land. And he did slay giants and things like that. But you know what I think he was scared of? He was scared of leading people. And God says this, hey, don't fear. Don't worry about it. You saw everything I did. I'm going to be with you too. You're going to take these kingdoms. You must not fear those people. And don't fear those Canaanites. God's going to fight for you. Deuteronomy 4, only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself. Look at this, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Teach them to your children and your grandchildren. Deuteronomy 4:9. Don't forget, right? Don't forget what God has done for you. Don't develop spiritual amnesia. Now, I want to think about you this morning. What is it that God has done for you that maybe you need to recall so that you don't develop amnesia? Everybody in this room has some kind of fear, some kind of something they're worried about. And it threatens this morning to institutionalize you. What do you need to be thinking back? You should regularly talk with your spouse, with your children, about the times that God brought you out of something. The times when it looked bad, and you can look back now and you can see God's hand was in it the whole time. As a church, we went through a series of things that we were scared about when the virus first started. I made a long list one morning of all the things I was scared about when the church was about to go on lockdown. And I wouldn't say I was scared, but I just didn't know the answer to very many of them. This is back in March when, the virus was just getting going in America, and Malaysia had blown up with cases. And you know what? God brought us through every single one of them. Here we are today. Our families are healthy. Malaysia, by and large, is healthy. We had enough food. We weren't sure we would, or we never lost power. God forbid, we never lost Wi-Fi. We made it through. Don't forget God's goodness to you. And that's just physical things. That's not to mention all the peace and the comfort that he'll give you in the hard times. That's not even to mention all that stuff. Don't develop spiritual amnesia. Heavenly Father, we just pray this morning that we will be people who remember, people who don't forget, people that will look back and honor you and remember what you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen.